Hey guys, what's up? This is No Chin Deluxe. Today I'm going to do a long iron tutorial for you. I thought that I'd probably start at the very beginning of where it all starts, which is the club tuner and how you have your clubs tuned, because the key to good long iron approaches is really, half of it I think is in your club tuning, because that really helps a lot if you can tune your clubs the way they should be. I'm just going to bring up my tune here for my irons. You can see that I have my distance at max, workability and draw fader at default, loft is maxed out, and then spin is at the minimum. What the loft is going to do is obviously give me a greater height to my shots, which is going to make them land softer to begin with. And then what the spin does is it actually reduces the amount of roll you get after the shot lands. So max loft mixed with min spin is actually going to create a really soft landing for your irons. Even for like a 1 iron, you can actually stick that in the right conditions. So what I want to do is just kind of take a couple shots here with my 3 iron. 3 iron is probably about the longest club that I tend to hit. With all my clubs tuned to max distance, you're really rarely going to have to make a shot longer than a 3 iron, and usually it's going to be like a 5 or 7 iron down. So I'm just going to take a couple shots here with my 3 iron so you can kind of see where my shot lands in the aiming circle. This is really important, and you should do this in the club tuner yourself. You want to actually see where the ball lands in the circle and then how far it rolls. If I didn't have spin turned down, I'd usually get about a landing in the middle of the circle and roll to the top of the aiming circle, which is how I play my wedge shots, because they actually kind of behave that way a little more. But my 3 iron, you'll see it has a little different effect. I'm just going to take a few shots here to show you what happens. Should be here in a second. Alright, you'll see that it actually hit dead center and really did not roll very far. I mean, we're pretty close to the middle of the circle, which is really important to realize, because when you're out on the course, what tends to happen is the conditions, like the wind and the terrain and the hardness of the greens and fairways, are actually going to be more of a factor than actually the roll of your shot itself. So let me just take another one. I'm just going to spray a few in there. Alright, you can see that they're all kind of, we're getting this nice little grouping kind of right in the center of the circle. And that's really important because, as you can see, we're not really getting that far from where we're aiming. So if we aim for the middle of the aiming circle, we're going to be able to get the ball pretty much exactly where we want to, as long as we adjust correctly for things like wind and terrain. So I just kind of wanted you to see this, and you should probably do this with your own character in your own club tuner settings, so you can kind of figure out how your shots behave in perfect conditions. And then when you go out on the course, you'll know how to predict what your shot's going to do once you take it. So for me, I'm going to pretty much aim for the center of the aiming circle and then go from there. And I'll show you kind of how some of that works out on the course. So I'm going to go ahead and load up one of my custom courses, which is 4 holes of Kiawah Island, which are, I think, some of the hardest holes in the game, especially when there's fast greens and fairways and things like that. But we'll talk about that when we get out there. So I will see you out on the course. Okay, I am out on my custom Kiawah Island course. This is 4 holes of Kiawah that I've set up so I can play them over and over, because these are the ones that tend to give me most trouble, especially in really expert settings. They're not so bad when you're playing online in like a Play Anyone, because the tees are blue and the pin's going to be average and everything else is going to be average. But when you play expert settings and custom games, these can be really, really nasty holes. So we're looking at holes number, let me see what I got here. Holes number 5, 8, 11, and 16. I actually have the tees set up to black and the pins set up to expert, just to kind of prove the point, because to make the shots a little more difficult, to show that they can actually be made. You'll probably be facing better conditions in Play Anyone matches, but I figured for the sake of the argument, I'd kind of throw a little difficulty here. Our first hole here is a par 3, and I'm from the black tees, and with my club tuning, I need to hit at least a 3 iron. Probably a 5 iron would be a little short. There's a couple things I want to look at right off the bat here. You can see that if we move the aiming circle around, we're not getting that much elevation change. It's pretty much level. We're getting a foot here and there. You can see there's a ridge right here. That ridge is going to be our aiming spot, because when you're hitting downhill, your irons are actually going to come down at not steeper, but they're going to come down with greater speed and a different trajectory, so they're going to want to roll a little further. And I explained some of this on my website, and there's some graphics to show you how it works. But basically, you're obviously going to get a little more distance out of your shots because they're downhill. On the other hand, we have a headwind, and the headwind is actually going to produce the opposite effect with long irons. The wind is going to pretty much get your ball either moving faster forward in the case of a tailwind, or it's going to slow down the speed of your ball in the case of a headwind like it is here. So even though your ball is kind of flying in the same trajectory, its actual forward acceleration is going to change based on the wind. And that's not going to necessarily affect how far your ball travels, but it's more going to affect what it does once it lands. Because if it has more acceleration when it lands, it's going to want to roll further. If it has less less velocity, I should say, then it's going to want to stick a little better once it lands on the green. So in this case, we have a headwind, and this is actually going to knock down our shot a little bit, to the point where when it hits the green, it's going to want to just kind of stop dead. And on top of it, we're having to aim for this ridge, this uphill ridge here. So we might actually be hitting the green kind of on an upward angle, which is going to knock down our ball even further once it lands. So what we're going to have to do is aim probably a little further than we feel comfortable with, just because the ball's not really going to roll much once it hits the green. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set up my 3-iron shot, because I know I'm going to have to get further than the 5-iron here. So we're going to put the pin right in the center of the aiming circle here. And remember, in my club tuner, the ball was landing pretty much right where the pin is, and then rolling just a tiny bit further, and that was on a flat ground with no wind. So here we're going to start with the aiming circle right centered on the spot where we want to land. And then we're going to want to actually adjust from there, and for the wind and for the downhill approach, and then that should get us to land right exactly where we want. Now, normally, I might, if this were a tailwind, I would want to aim my 3-iron somewhere back here probably, because it's going to have a greater velocity when it hits, so it's going to want to roll further, and that'd be a really tricky shot. So, but in this case, since we have a headwind, it's really going to knock that ball down. It's not going to roll much when it hits, so we're just going to center it right here. Remember, in the club tuner, the ball really wasn't rolling much, so I don't think we have much of a risk of rolling off the green here. At most, it's going to roll to the top of the aiming circle, and that's still going to be on the green in this case. So we're playing for a safe shot there. So we got our aiming spot. Now we have to adjust for our downhill and our wind. I'm just going to use my regular method that I use for wedges, which is going to be adjust 3 yards for every foot downhill. So we're going to actually pull this back 3 yards. And then we're actually going to want to adjust, add 6 yards of distance for our 6-mile-per-hour headwind. So we'll add 6 yards to this. And that gives us a 77%. We don't have to adjust left or right because it's a straight headwind. So we're just going to go ahead and loft in 77% into our 3-iron. If you don't know how to do that, you want to see my other tutorial that I did, my other video on basics of approach. But we're going to go ahead and loft in 77% on our 3-iron here. Take the shot. Alright, let's go ahead and see what we can do here. We might actually hold this out or get really close. I saw a partial percentage there. Alright, that's awesome. And you saw how we skipped right off the fairway, exactly what we wanted to do. I think the AHO kind of took over a little bit there, but we were going to be close anyway. Okay, now we are on hole number 8, which is the second hole in my custom course. It's another par 3. You can see that we're actually lined up for a 5-iron shot here rather than a 3-iron, so we'll get a little practice with that. Now remember, obviously, the shorter iron you go, the softer landing you're going to have, the less rolls you're going to have. It's kind of the physics of the loft system in choosing a golf club. So Here we're actually going to have to adjust a little less than the 3 iron for roll, but notice that we now have a tailwind. So like I said, it's going to increase the velocity of your ball, so it's actually going to want to roll a little further when it hits. So the first thing I want to do is I'm probably going to want to back this up, I don't know, maybe around something around there. We can go down to like 90%. I took about 10% off. Was that 10%? Yeah, about 10% off. This is kind of a feel thing. You can kind of just visualize it. I mean, if the ball were to aim past the top of my aiming circle, we'd still have a little bit of green to work with, and that's kind of what I'm just looking at there.